Welcome to Say More, the Powerhouse podcast dedicated to elevating the voices and journeys of women striving for the C-suite and those who've already conquered it. Brace yourself for candid conversations, illuminating interviews, and unfiltered insights as we delve into the triumphs, hurdles, and invaluable lessons learned along the path to success. Join us on this empowering journey where inspiration meets empowerment and wisdom reigns supreme. Get ready to ignite your ambition, harness your potential, and thrive alongside your sisters on Say More. Thank you for joining another episode of Say More, the Powerhouse podcast, where it's women talking to other women about their journey, whether you're in college, whether you're in high school, whether you're part of the C-suite already. There is a conversation to be had about that journey and even about where you are now. Opportunities for us to help one another, to talk about the hurdles, talk about the challenges, and certainly talk about those successes. And today I have an amazing guest who will share some insight about her own journey, but I know that, as listeners, we'll all relate to it as well, find some pieces and be able to take that nugget and share with others. If you have not shared this podcast with anyone yet, please make sure you do with all of your friends, your sisters, your neighbors, your colleagues, and that they get a chance to say more about how we elevate other women. How do we do that? How do we inspire? How do we empower? So today's guest, Heather Kitties. And it's a great conversation that we're going to have. And it's about, really the journey and your journey today to the C-suite and what inspired you to pursue, this leadership role and how you just navigated your career path to get you to the point where you are today.
First of all, thank you for everything you're doing. I love, just helping women help other women. I think everybody wants to help, right? Like as women, we want to help. And sometimes it's just, we don't know how. So I love this forum that you've created and thank you for having me. I mean, I think, when I think about my career path, it has not been linear and it has not been clean. It's been messy. It's been full of some successes. It's been full of failures. Like it's just a mismatch, I think, of like hard work and not being scared to take some risks and then also like luck, being at the right place at the right time, and also just having, some great mentors that help guide me along, right? And having women that I could look up to and aspire to be. It's just been a really interesting journey that I never would have predicted, when I first started out a long time ago.
I love that. I love that with, Say More. It's about, the authentic, genuine feelings and thoughts and comments that we can share. And I love that what you pointed out for our listeners, that it's not been a straight line. It's been some curves. It's been some, some have been rocky. Some has been, smooth. So I think it's great that our listeners hear that, because oftentimes, we can beat ourselves up because, hey, it doesn't look like what I read about or what I, saw on social media. So I must not be doing this thing right. And that's so unfair. One, that if we do it to ourselves, but when others impose that same view on other people and other women. So it really is to talk about that today. And so when I think about the prominent leadership position that you hold and you can share that, what, challenges have you faced throughout your career journey? I mean, because you have been in a number of key roles, and just how did you overcome some of those challenges? And what advice would you, give to our listeners?
I would say, first and foremost is just being an advocate for yourself. I spent, almost 20 years in journalism before I moved over to the healthcare space. And I think, most of that is kind of mid-management, working in an industry that also very mission driven like healthcare, but also in an industry, right, that was rapidly changing, the industry not maybe changing as fast as it needed to stay, profitable and relevant. But I think the things that really held me back there were just, not having a lot of. The thing that I like about the business world is, right, it is very objective, goal oriented. You set tasks, you do it. You have people along the way who really reward and appreciate, your results. I think, journalism it's like an industry of storytellers, and I think the thing that was really hard for me there, right, was just no one necessarily thinking about careers. Like, we were so focused on the stories that I really just didn't have a wealth of people saying, hey, like, maybe when you voice your displeasure with, a direction that we're going in a meeting, that you, instead of criticizing someone else's idea, that you pitch a better idea, or, hey, like, maybe you do, collaborate some of that dirty laundry behind the scenes and make sure that you're understanding other people's viewpoints before you just say something and maybe catch people off guard. It was just feedback that I could have used earlier in my career to be, a more collaborative teammate, to be like a stronger advocate for, for my group of writers that I was managing. I just think, looking back at young Heather, I'm a little bit embarrassed, like, oh, like, no wonder, like, I kind of got stuck in mid-management. I think, the thing that was it for me, right, is just, I was about to turn 40 and, going through another round of layoffs. And that's just a horrible place to be, right? When there's just not enough money to pay everybody and you got to pick who gets to keep their job and who isn't. And just like the enormous weight of that. And they were offering a round of buyouts, and they're like, oh, like, so enough people, volunteers took the buyouts, we wouldn't have to do any layoffs. And I can remember, right, just thinking, my job is who I am. Like, a journalist is who I am. Like, this is what I went to college for. But then also just thinking, like, is this really what I want to do? Is this really where I want to be, right? Like, just working. I had gotten so many promotions without any corresponding pay increase. Heather today would never take a promotion without a pay increase. Like, who was it? What was I thinking? Like, it was just a whole other mindset. And I think, I took the leap. Like, I took a job for half the pay, hoping that my skills translated, and just kept taking those sort of expanded steps. But I think, I guess my overall advice through that journey is, like, I wish I would have been a learner. I wish I would have been more focused on my own career a little bit sooner than I was, and just setting those sort of career plans and 5-year goals. I was just, like, in it for the love of what I was doing that day.
Right.
So just, like, I wish I would have thought a little more long-term earlier. I wish I would have left journalism a little earlier, quite frankly. And I wish, that I would have, not been so scared to pivot and change course. And I would say, like, the last 10 years, I've grown and learned so much. I've had the privilege of having so many mentors. One in particular, just this really strong woman who has since retired, but just so great at, like, holding a room, helping people be accountable, helping people succeed, but also helping us accomplish what we needed, and tactfully, right? And not, and not the brash and sassy, that I can a little bit cringe when I think about.
I love that, because just you sharing it, because again, I think our listeners will appreciate that. Even though, and certainly layoffs can be devastating, even thinking about a career change can be totally devastating, but how you chose that and saw that as an opportunity to pivot and to really reflect on what it is that you want to do and what would you change about that. So again, it's not a failure if you don't move forward and learn from it. And I think it's okay that we have these moments. I think oftentimes, as women, we can see things as periods versus a comma. Okay, it's the next thing. So I think it's so, powerful that you shared lessons learned, but you also shared the power of what you have learned And what you know now is just a no-go. Why take, a whole number of promotions without the compensation piece to go along with it? And I need, and I'm certain that you have that same commitment for our listeners, regardless of where you are in your stage, but certainly those that are just starting out, to hear this, to understand this, and to have people in your corner that you can have these conversations with. Certainly Say More will be a go-to for you, but it's important to have people in your corner that you can have those conversations with. Thinking about, the journey that you had, the move from one career to the next, in your experience, how do you think gender diversity has impacted any decision making and innovation within, I guess, even the organizations that you've been a part of? What did you think about the career that you had, or even the current one now?
Yeah, I think in the career that I had, right, it's interesting. I recently had lunch with one of my former coworkers from my newspaper days, and we just, there's a journalism is still to this day very male dominated, right? And so there's it is very man centric, for lack of a better word. And I think, sometimes, and again, I'm approaching 50, so I've things are certainly better right now than they used to be. But I think that there's just, there were just those roles I think that women could play. Like we were talking about, like women as what leader they support, right? Versus being leaders in their own right. And I think that there were certainly some of us who felt, that way, is like, oh, well, that, that person's job is just to make so-and-so look good, versus that person's job, and just having to center your career, I think, around a man. I think we've certainly come a long way from that. Healthcare, I'm so grateful, right? Like it's largely female dominated, right? In a lot of places, like on my team, we were just talking the other day about how, so there's now 80 people or so on my team. About 8 of them are men. Otherwise, it is a very female dominated team, like most of healthcare. So it's kind of an awesome place to be, healthcare, and be a woman. But I think still, right, there is still issues around, I see some of my friends who have gone on from journalism and now they're in different careers across different industries. And just, there's still, we've come a long way, but there's still ways to go, right? In terms of just equal opportunity and pay inequities. Like those are all things that we need to keep our eye on. I just, one of the things here is that's so great is, I know our CEO is so wonderful, but then a couple of years ago, our parent company, a young woman in our 40s was named CEO of our entire company. And that was just so inspiring, right? Because if you can't see yourself in a role, if you don't have anybody to aspire to or look up to, and I just remember how affirming and wonderful that was when that news came about who our new, corporate CEO would be, like how meaningful that was, not just to me, but to everyone really across the company. Because I think that's the thing, is like healthcare largely, with women, but now also at the very top, a woman. And that's a really cool thing for us.
I think it's great what you said. I mean, the excitement that we can have for others, there is certainly enough opportunity for all to have and play a role in that, but really to be sharing the excitement for the success being seen by others. And I think this is probably a great segue for thinking about, what initiatives, because of your own journey, have you had the opportunity to implement or witness that foster diversity and inclusion over the course of your career that really stood out?
Yeah, I would say, at Sunshine Health, diversity is just such a crucial piece of our success, right? Just that diversity of our workforce, the inclusion of just making sure everyone has a seat at the table. Like you can't have true innovation if you don't have all different people of backgrounds and beliefs to come and help fuel that, help bring their life experience and all of the wisdom that comes with that into your engagement approaches. That's just so crucial. So I think I'm really lucky that I get to be in a space where that's so highly valued. But I think for me, like the place where I feel like I still try to help others, right, that can still be a struggle is just that whole, and I've even talked to my own son about this, right? He's 25 now and he's early in his career. And I think there's just such a balance between, that whole notion of, can you bring your real self to work, right? Do you get to be authentically you at work? And I think I'll be happy when we don't have to have this conversation anymore, right? But I think that just that establishing trust, right? And with your team, being honest about your mistakes, being honest about, other people, like feedback for others, like that's just such a crucial part. And I think, it's just, we're getting close, right? But there's still just a lot of work to be done around just helping people feel comfortable to be their real selves at work, to raise their hand, even if it's maybe out of the scope of their expertise, but they have a lived experience that can inform a strategy, like just being willing to, make that leap and raise their hand and volunteer for the extra assignment that seems a little, out of their comfort zone. I feel like for me, like I spend a lot of time just trying to share a little bit of courage with people, because I think early in my career, I had so much fear, and I led from a place where it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to, I'm not going to take that risk. And I just, I just want to encourage people to take all the risks. Like, failures are really just opportunities to like grow and learn, or maybe just do something different. Like, not every table's for you. And I feel like I'm at that age where it's like, I don't need to be at every table. Like, you spend the early part of your career just trying to like fight and earn your seat at the table. And now, like, I feel like I've turned the corner. I was like, every table's not for me. Like, and that's okay.
I love that. And for a lot of listeners, I know this is going to be the crystal ball that they're kind of looking into what would be the other side of this. Because again, while you're going through it and while you're feeling it and trying to find every table possible that you can sit at, that there is the other side and flip side that you discover is that every table was not a table that you needed to reach. Or in some instances, I think, you've talked about some of the experiences and you've talked about even, highlighting the success of others. But I think, we have to be, and I love that Say More allows for this, that we can be transparent in our conversations, that it's not just the gender piece that we're talking about, because some of the challenges that I know that you've heard and that I've certainly heard throughout my career has involved other women with other women, relative to, difficulties that they face. And so I don't want to, and I know that we oftentimes think that maybe it's just a, man versus woman. No, it can happen in all different places. And so there are opportunities for us all to learn and be reflective. And I guess, again, when you've talked about where this whole idea of overcoming challenges and then thinking about gender diversity, leadership often comes with its share of setbacks and failures, right? Can you share, a significant professional setback that you encountered and how you managed to bounce back from it? Because resilience is such a key thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, right, it was when I decided to leave journalism and take a job for half the pay and, kind of really sort of go back to that ground level of an individual contributor and what does that look like? And like, it felt like a failure at the time. It was so scary. And I can just remember being like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing? Like, is this gonna be my life? But it was it turned out to be exactly what I needed, right? Because I had to just really right away put me back into that growth mindset of like, I need to learn these things. I need to figure this out. I need to be working in the corner over here to make my skills better. Like, in journal, like, this is going to sound so minute, but it's just kind of a good example. It's like, PowerPoint is the language of corporate America, and students are learning it in school now. I didn't, right? Like, I'm of a certain age where we didn't learn PowerPoint in school, and it definitely wasn't a skill set that you needed in journalism, but it literally, so I can remember just at night just trying to figure that out and trying to figure out how to make things act like Microsoft Word, which it really doesn't, right? It took me a long time, but it's just things like that, right? It really helped at that really low level, put me into a growth mindset that has really helped my career throughout the last decade of just not being afraid to ask questions, not being afraid to go acquire the skills. I think a lot of times people are just afraid to say they don't know something or ask someone to teach them something. And I have been so incredibly blessed by just having people and coworkers that I could go to and say, can I put time on your calendar for you to walk me through this? I would love to just get a better understanding of how this all works. People want to help you. I think sometimes young women come to me and they're like, I want a mentor. Like, how does that work? And I'm like, well, it can work so many different ways. And I'm not going to tell you what the answer for you is. But what it looked like for me was just having small requests. Like, can you help me understand this? Can you help me understand that? Can you walk me through this project? Can you share your project plan on that? I'd love to see how that came together behind the scenes, because that's awesome what you did. Because I think sometimes, like, I never have approached someone and been like, hey, can you please be my mentor? I think that can be intimidating for people, right? Because they don't know what that means. Does that mean you want to meet with me once a week for an hour? I don't have an hour.
Right.
But if you put 15 minutes on my calendar and say, hey, I would love to understand this, like, I'm 9 times out of 10 going to accept that if it fits into my schedule. So I think for me, it's just, keeping that sort of growth mindset, even if it's just a little bit of time a week. I mean, we all have a full plate. It's so hard to think about your career and balance your work deliverables and try to manage your family. It's a lot to be a woman, right? I think one of the things that I still see, in a lot of my friends and coworkers is just this idea that women still have to do it all, right? In a way that men just don't feel that same burden. And I think that's it. Like, you don't have to boil the ocean. Like, just take one little tiny step, at least once a month or once a week, whatever you can carve out to build your career or build your brand. And then you're moving, like, you're keeping that momentum. You don't have to run if you just keep taking those little steps, and they eventually add up.
Heather, but quick question for you when I think about this. And so asking questions, you're right, it's powerful. That's how you learn. But then there are situations, and I'm certain that listeners are probably saying this to themselves, that this sounds like a perfect environment and a perfect climate that you can feel comfortable in asking questions. I hear often across the nation from women, regardless of kind of where they are in their stage of career journey, where they say, you know what, if I ask a question, it's going to come across as if I don't know and I'm not qualified to be in the role that I'm in, that people are going to question me because I had that question. So what's been your experience with that? Because I love how you describe that and how you decided to, take that next step and be a person of inquiry. But what advice would you give in those instances where, you ask the question and you're already perhaps the only woman or whatever else on the leadership team? What kind of conversation would you offer for that?
Honestly, I would say maybe you're not in the right place. I think, I spend a lot of time
in our audience. I mean, we need to hear that. Yeah.
Because that's a hard thing, right? Like, I spent a lot of time in the wrong place. And I think, obviously it's the benefit of age, right? When you accumulate all of these experiences, you can look back at your younger self and be like, I don't want to rock the boat, but like, maybe you should rock the boat, because if they don't appreciate people are not, like, here's what I always try to tell people, like, especially on my own team or my friends or whoever, like, this job in healthcare, it might not be for you. It's not for everybody. It is constantly changing. It's a lot of busy, like, priorities change from one day to the next. We have to be reactive, and I think not everybody loves to be in kind of that fast-paced and sometimes chaotic environment. And it's not your fault, and it's not the company's fault. Like, that might just not be the right place for you. And that's not failure. that's a step to
Yeah.
you finding your true purpose and where you're supposed to be. So like, I think that, if you feel like, my advice is, if you feel like you're spending too much time trying to fit into an organization and trying to make sure that you don't rock the boat, it's probably not your boat. And also, if you want to come to our boat, send teen jobs, then you just filter down to Florida. And we're always looking for great talent.
I love how you answered that authentically, because, oftentimes we look for the most politically correct response to it. But really, as you've mentioned, it's about, and it's okay to think about appropriate fit. Sometimes, people feel like, well, if I'm not here, then I'm not any. You are. When you get to the right spot, I promise you will flourish. So it's about, reflecting in on that and realizing that, honestly, to stay longer in that space doesn't help anyone, because you're not growing and they're not benefiting from what you know, because you're afraid to ask the questions. So thank you. Thank you for that. And then, Heather, when I think about, again, just some of what you've talked about, how have you looked at ways to pay it forward and support the development of aspiring female leaders within your organization or even outside of it? Because being in a role like you're in, you can't help but have people that ask specific things about, could you answer this, or could you help me with this?
Yeah, I think for me, right, it is just helping empower other women to be their own best advocate. I think, we all come from, we all are shaped by our own experiences. And I think because I had, I spent such a long time in a place where I didn't feel valued, and also like I was not advocating for myself, that I always make time to just give feedback to people about how they do things, or just how to be a better advocate for themselves. I think, for the most part, like, I think people are really grateful for feedback. I think because I felt like I was feedback starved earlier in my career, like I'm very generous with feedback. I will tell you this, like, one of my team members would constantly say, like, why do I feel like every time we go to happy hour, it's a performance evaluation? I'm like, it's not a performance evaluation. I just really want to help you, right? Like, sometimes people get in their own way and they don't know. Like, I look back at young Heather and all the ways I got in my own way. Like, if someone would have just taken time to give me that direct, candid feedback, then, I would have been so much better, so much earlier. And I think that that's like the gift that I just try to give, not just to women, to everyone, but really, especially for women, is just because we are, our tendency is not to be a great advocate for ourselves. Our tendency is not necessarily like to be a strong advocate for our teams, right?
Yeah.
But not necessarily to be a strong advocate for ourselves. And so I really, just try to also help people understand that people treat us the way that we allow them to treat us, right? And again, like, every table is not for us, and it doesn't mean anything about us. It's not a reflection of us. Like, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a reflection of that. It's just not a good fit. And that's just, we're in the business. I tell like everybody, like, we're in the business of ourselves. So first and foremost, right, like, I'm the business of Heather and what's best for me and like my children, and how that works, like how that happens, right? And so I think nobody ever, like, women shouldn't be apologetic for making choices and decisions that are in their own best interest, but I feel like sometimes Absolutely. We do, right? It's another thing I always do is like, please stop apologizing. Like, we don't. I even work on apologizing. Like, I'll stop an email when I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry to whatever. Like, I still do that, right? And I in all intents, like, I feel like, oh, I made it, but like, I still do that. It's just so ingrained in who we are sometimes. And I just really like try to guard against that in myself. And I try to flag that kind of stuff for other people. It's a continual journey, right?
It's a continuum. And you know what? You're such a great conversationalist, because you've actually brought up another conversation in my mind where, as you said, it's kind of ingrained. It's like the manners piece, if you will, of apologizing if there is a delay. And so, here's the dilemma for some, and I'm certain that listeners are thinking, okay, what about when you recognize that and you stop doing that, but the people around you, depending upon who they are and what their experiences have been, they then take that and that is used against, like, well, she's not apologetic. She is just, too strong. She's just, not caring, and she's not acknowledging her own. So talk about that. Again, a lot of what you've said already, it depends on, are you in the right spot and environment, right fit? But that, what I've just shared, and as you were shaking your head, you can relate to as well of how that's then perceived. Whereas if someone else, another gender may have done that, it would not be brought up. So how have you had worked through that in your own head? And even through the mentoring conversations that you've had with, aspiring leaders.
Yeah, it's hard, right? It's hard to be a woman. And I think just acknowledging that it's hard with each other and having that female network of support, right, wherever it is essential. Because there are times, right, I think one way that I deal with it is just by being a good team member to others and expecting other people to be good team members to us, right? I think that's kind of the foundation of just mutual respect. So I'm not apologizing, but I got to it when I got to it. Here you go, right? Because that's kind of what we get, right? From the other side of the fence, that's what it looks like, and no one questions that. And I think also, like, there are times where I feel like that there is a trust, right, in our workplace, and we are really so lucky to have just such a great leadership team and such a great, just team members at every level, that I do think that there is a baseline trust that when something kind of, what I would say, goes sideways and someone's feelings get hurt, so that we can raise our hand and be like, hey, like, help me understand why you did that. Like, just approaching those things from a place of learning. And I've had people stop with me because like I think that my leadership style is very direct. I think I get to be, people who are new to my team get very surprised by how direct and maybe not abrupt, right, but just concise. I am overly concise. I think sometimes people have this idea of like someone who's like a marketing executive and they're always flowery and they're always, just so nice and so polished. And I really am just, I'm just cut from a little bit different cloth. Like, I get to the point, I get out of the point. But I also take time to express my genuine concern and appreciation for the team and for the work and for the effort. And so I think it's a little bit of, once you establish that trust, right, you can raise your hand when something doesn't feel good, or people can come to me if something doesn't feel good or they don't understand. Like, I always try to take time for big things to explain the why. Right. I think that's something that I'm always continually working on too, is like, I have all these journeys going on in my head, and it's important that I remember to take people along with me so that like my behavior like makes sense. Because sometimes I realize I could be like, oh, like I'm thinking about 8 different things. And sometimes I just try to remember to just take time to explain the why. So then maybe my actions, like, apologies for getting these results to you 2 weeks later, but I was the blah, blah, blah. Like, sometimes I will say, hey, like, here's this bucket of stuff, we prioritized it after we did project Y. Like, let me know if you have any questions. Like, so it's a little bit the why and not the apology. So people like know that I'm not just like, I don't want people to feel disrespected, but at the same time, like, I also like want to hold a respect for myself.
I love that. And I love that how you've taken the approach that you are recognizing that the why could assist them in helping them to better understand. But at the same time, you're not shortchanging yourself, and where that it needs to move to, and that apologies should not be the hallmark for every female leader as you're, trying to operate in your day-to-day business. Right. So, can you?
I mean, even as the words are coming out of my mouth, though, right? You can't. Even as the words are coming out of my mouth, though, like, it's like you can't over-explain the why, because men aren't over-explaining the why. Exactly. You don't want to. I'm justifying my decision by the blah, blah, blah. Like it's so hard. It's hard to be a woman.
It's very, and that's why, again, say more. The whole notion behind even kicking this off was, you talk about experiences and you never waste an experience. But I thought this is the place where these conversations have got to come to the forefront, because we're all kind of challenging and being battling with the same kinds of things that are happening. So I appreciate, again, your honesty. And I think it's a great, segue to, it's hard being a leader, but then also, how do you prioritize self-care and just to maintain a healthy, I say work-life balance, work-life integration, whatever the buzzword is for today, but how do you do that?
I'm still working on it. I think for me,
I knew that. And so, listeners, if you're just listening to it and can't see it, she is still there. But it's like what we all do. It's that long pause of, okay, how are we doing this thing? So, Heather, your answer.
Yeah, I think I'm still working on that. It is how I now have. I think about how I practice self-care is just giving myself grace to know that the scale's never going to be perfectly balanced. Sometimes I'm winning at life. I'm running. I'm, going on hiking trips with my family. And sometimes I'm winning at work and I'm getting all these great things done. And I'm really proud of the work and the progress. But those two things often can't happen at the same time. And it's okay. Like, I don't, sometimes like I have a long day, and my kids are both grown now. They're wonderful. They're 25 and 20. And just, sometimes I'll have a really long day, and what I really wanted to do was call them and catch up with them at the end of the day. But I'm just so tired. I've been talking all day. I'm just emotionally exhausted. I don't create that connection. Sometimes that's the feedback that they give, and mom, like, hey, like maybe just call and check us in on us more, or hey, like, so like, I definitely value and prioritize our quality family time together. But sometimes like the workday wins, and then I'm like, oh, like I don't, it's just, I just try to give myself grace, right? I try to know that I just need to make sure I'm putting some wins in both sides, and it's not always going to be a perfect.
Not a perfect balance. So, I think, again, that's the honest piece of this, because, a lot of people will say, well, I have it. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure how you have it. I've not had it, for years, being in key leadership roles, but I understand the importance of it. And as you said, I think grace and allowing and extending that grace to yourself certainly gets you there sooner. So here's one that I know, and as I'm thinking about this question that I'm going to ask you, I hear this quite a bit too. So can you share your, insights on fostering a culture of support and collaboration among women in the workplace? And I'll add this caveat, because you always hear it, particularly in environments where competition or crab mentality may be prevalent. How does that work?
I would say that, I would say that it's really important, right, to have, like, I read this somewhere, and I'm sorry that whoever owns this particular phrase and piece of work, that I can't properly cite it, but I think it's really important to sort of have kind of your board of directors, right, so that you have that female group of women who you can rely on, who support you, right? And that you are helping foster and include other people, and just like ever growing the group, so that it is a community of women who can surface, like, I think everybody's like, oh, I don't want to ask a stupid question, but it's just creating those spaces where people, especially women, can just bring like their concerns, their fears, and have that space to discuss it. And then also like, just understand each other. I think sometimes when I've seen women not get along with each other, it's because it's just a misunderstanding. Like somebody hasn't taken time to listen to what the other person's trying to accomplish, and another person is inadvertently doing things that's harming like a particular project owned by another woman. And it's not purposeful, right? It's just taking that extra time. And I would just say, if you feel like you're getting crossways with someone, to just, again, like just invite them out, right, for lunch, or invite them out for a drink, or just even put a couple minutes on their schedule to say, hey, like, help me understand what you're trying to do here. Because a lot of times we're all trying to get to the same place, and maybe we're taking different paths, and those paths can sometimes get crossways because it's competing resources, scarce resources type mentality. But just taking time to try to understand the women around you and their goals and what they're trying to do, I think eliminates most of that. Like, I truly feel like that is just a miscommunication among the tribe.
I so appreciate that. And listeners, we can all lock into a situation that we've been exposed to. And we may have put the title on it, crab mentality, but to be very honest, we're all in it together. So how can one or more take that, I call it that bigger step, and say, let's have a conversation, just like Heather described. Don't let it lie there and fester, but really look at ways to communicate. And I think, that as we look at where we're going as women and looking ahead, even for yourself, Heather, what do you envision for the future of women in leadership roles in your sector? And what do you think, what steps do you think organizations can take to really further promote gender equality and empower women to excel in the C-suite?
I mean, I think, organizations as a whole, right, just to need to make sure that, their internal promotions are, clearly and fairly done. Like, that's one of the things I really think we do well at. We have such a great internal fill rate for our, director and above, with like just grooming people for those leadership roles at Sunshine. I just had a meeting the other day with some new team members that are coming into our department, and it was just so incredible to hear about their career journeys. Like, most of them had been here longer than me. I've been here 8 years now. That's really long in my estimation, right? But these were folks who had been here 10 years or 12 years, and just an incredible, to hear about how people have navigated their individual careers. I think if companies can just foster a place where employees can see themselves learning and growing, and also not being afraid to raise their hand and be like, hey, like, I think I'm ready for a new challenge, or hey, help me take the next steps. I think that is like the key thing to helping women, achieve success at whatever level they want to achieve success at, right? And that's also recognizing that, not everybody, just wants to have a continual progression, up the corporate ladder. I think, everybody's goals are different. And I think the more that we can create an environment where everyone feels valued and supportive and, can see the future for themselves, I think the better. But also there needs to be those systemic issues, like those systemic, processes where you're looking at pay inequities from a large scale and fixing things that maybe are broken, right? Like, that's a very key piece of the puzzle too, that companies need to make sure that they're doing.
I love how, as much as you've evolved into the leader that you are, that you have chosen an organization that is doing and has that same commitment level. And I think our listeners will hear that when those things match, there is, great success that can be had from everybody. The organization wins as well as the leader. So thank you for pointing that out. And as we move to our last question, we've talked about it before, but when reflecting on your journey, and if you could go back and things that you would tell your 20-year-old self, but is there anything else that you haven't told us that you think about that, 20-year-old self, this is the guidance that I'd give you today?
I would say, right, is just being genuine with yourself and with others. I think, we've just being your own advocate, as much as we advocate for our families and advocate for our teams. I mean, we've all had that place where you're in a group meeting and you say an idea, and then it sort of, the conversation goes on, but then 3 minutes later, a man says it and it's like the best idea ever. I think sometimes, right, it's just about, like in a very genuine, kind way, be like, oh, like make a joke out of it. Like, I think sometimes when you feel like things aren't going well, even if it doesn't change things, I think there's just a way to flag some of those things so that you feel great. Like, it's not always, it doesn't always go my way, right? Like and when it doesn't, I am the first one to be like, oh, that was a bad idea for me. That didn't turn out how I was going to think it was going to be. But I think it all like really just comes back to like following your gut, following your instinct, being true to who you are, and not being afraid to take risks. Like, I just wish I would have taken more risks earlier. So many of the things that I've learned through failure. Like, that's just a key ingredient of life. Like, I spent a lot of time stuck in places because I was afraid of the unknown. And I would just be like, take the leap, ask for help, right? Like, people want to help you.
I love that. And listeners, thank you for being a part of today's conversation. And thank you for marking this as a favorite. Thank you for subscribing. And thank you for supporting other women as we all, continue down the path of our own journeys. We're in it together. Say more for you, for all of us. Thank you for tuning in.